الله الرحمن الرحيم ولنبلونكم حتى نعلم المجاهدين منكم والصابرين ونبلو أخباركم ولنبلونكم حتى نعلم المجاهدين منكم والصابرين ونبلو أخباركم إن الذين كفروا وصدوا عن سبيل الله وشاقوا الرسول من بعد ما تبين لهم الهدى لن يضروا الله شيئا وسيحبط أعمالهم لن يضروا الله شيئا وسيحبط أعمالهم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول ولا تبطلوا أعمالكم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول ولا تبطلوا أعمالكم إن الذين كفروا وصدوا عن سبيل الله ثم ماتوا وهم كفار فلن يغفر الله لهم فلا تهنوا وتدعوا إلى السلم وأنتم الأعلون والله معكم ولن يتركم أعمالكم إنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وإن تؤمنوا وتتقوا يؤتكم أجوركم ولا يسألكم أموالكم إن يسألكموها فيحفكم تبخلوا ويخرج أضغانكم ها أنتم هؤلاء تدعون لتنفقوا في سبيل الله فمنكم من يبخل ومن يبخل فإنما يبخل عن نفسه والله الغني وأنتم الفقراء والله الغني وأنتم وأنتم الفقراء وإن تتولوا يستبدل قوما غيركم وإن تتولوا يستبدل قوما غيركم ثم لا يكونوا أمثالكم وإن تتولوا يستبدل قوما غيركم ثم لا يكونوا أمثالكم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Can we get another lot salawat for Brother Brazargan for that beautiful recitation of Quran? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just kind of going over the programs for the next few nights. We'll have program every day until Sunday, starting at 6:45 with namaz. And on Sunday there'll be 2 programs, one in the day, and then one in the evening, inshallah. And for the speaker that'll be with us for these next few nights is Maulana Sheikh Jafar Muhibbullah. He's here from Iran. He's been studying there for a long time and has done a lot of great things there. Translated a lot of books. And so please help me invite him up with a lot salawat.
صلى على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, for the well-being of the community, all the mu'mineen, mu'minat, another salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And for the hastened reappearance of Imam al-Zaman, Ajjal Allah Tafaraju Sharif, and even louder salat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم صلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والله أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة لعلكم تشكرون. صدق الله علي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. As we begin our discussion yesterday about the hadith where Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created al-aql, He's created the intellect, and He has also created al-jahl, ignorance. We explained what these two things are, but just to give a bit more clarification, as one question came yesterday evening about the idea of al-jahl. Where Imam Sadiq, he states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala خلق الجهل من البحر الأجاج ظلمانيا. And what exactly is this jahl? We mentioned that to some extent from the context of this particular hadith, that we understand also, as Mullah Sadr, one of our great scholars and philosophers, he states that between, or at least as the aql is explained in this particular hadith, al-aql wal-jahl, they're basically one thing, but at two different extremes or two different ends. Not extremes, but two different ends, two different degrees. Whereas aql is a sign of perfection, al-jahl is a sign of incompleteness, a deficiency. A deficiency in the faculty of understanding, of processing things. However, as we stated, that one of the things that may indicate this in this particular hadith, because this speaking in a language that is quite metaphorical, Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he states that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created al-jahl, he told the jahl, or he commanded, he says, adbir, fa'adbara. He told the jahl to move away. Now, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have or occupy any particular space and time. But what is being defined here and what is being conveyed is that this thing or this faculty or this weakness of faculty, which it is termed jahl or ignorance, it is something that has a bit of comprehension. It understands. Why? Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says go, it moved away. Then he says aqbil. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the jahl to come back, and it didn't come back. So simply by that initial command, it understood and it obeyed. But there wasn't complete obedience. On the other hand, aql, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to Imam Sadiq, when he created it, he says adbir, so the aql goes away. Then he says aqbil, then return, and the aql returns. So we see that with regards to the aql or the intellect, it is that which is in obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It understands, it has comprehension, whereby it obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by moving away from his proximity and then returning back to the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas the jahl or ignorance or the weakness of the faculty of intellect, it moved away, but it did not return upon the second command. So what exactly is this jahl? As we mentioned, it is something that, from the wording, al-bahr al-ujaj, ajja means also to kindle a fire. Unlike some of the translations, they say that a brackish, from a brackish ocean. But I preferred to say from a dim abyss. Why? Because that abyss, if it is dim, if there's something, if there's kindling in it, or we explain that ilm, knowledge, is light, then that light is dim with regards to jahl, meaning that it is dim. It's not completely extinguished. Again, because the jahl understood, moved away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's proximity, but did not return. Al-jahl, also within the Islamic sciences, we see that it is defined in different ways. One of the ways that jahl is defined or used within Islamic sciences, particularly in Islamic law and fiqh, you have two types of jahl. One is called jahl qasir. The individual can be jahl qasir, meaning that it is a peripheral ignorance or not understanding of something. And then you have jahl muqassir, someone who is delinquent, or you could say delinquent ignorance. What is the difference between the two? Jahl qasir is, for example, someone doesn't know anything. Someone does not have knowledge about something. And let's give one example, that if someone had a wound, their wound was open and the wound made a stain on their clothes the size of a quarter, or slightly larger than the size of a quarter. The person prayed, they made their salat, and then they saw this before the time of salat went out. But then the time of salat passed. After the time of salat passed, again, they did have knowledge that if they had a blood stain on their clothes, that they're supposed to wash it. That salat has to be repeated because there's this blood that's on their clothes, larger than the size of a quarter. They didn't understand it. They didn't know this, and they had no means of understanding this while that salat was in. Later, perhaps the next day, they found out that, oh, this is the case, because they were jahl qasir, meaning that they did not know what the rule was, and they had no means at the time to understand the rule. Then they don't have to repeat the salat. Let's finish. However, the other individual who is jahl muqassir, meaning he had the same issue. However, this individual, he has the ability, he has the means to understand what the rule is. However, that individual was delinquent with regards to going forth to understand what the rule is in this particular case. And because they were delinquent with regards to understanding what the law was, then that person is held responsible. So although they were able to understand, and they had, for example, the books with them, the books of law, and it was clear for them, or they had access to someone that they could inquire about the law, that what should I do? But they refused to go forth. They refused to open the book. They didn't open the book. They didn't pose a question to the person who could respond to them, so they are held responsible once the salat goes out, and they did not do due diligence with regards to their duty and their responsibility, so then they must make up the salat. This is just an example, a possible example of this scenario. Within the science of logic and philosophy, they also, scholars, they also divide jahl, ignorance, into two types. One is what they call jahlun basit, the other is jahlun murakkab. Jahlun basit is, for example, someone doesn't know something, and they realize that, well, hey, I don't know what my responsibility is, or I don't know this particular subject. And in fact, some of the scholars, they say that this is the grounds and basis for understanding and basis for knowledge, because when you understand that you don't know something, then most people go forth and they begin to acquire at least some understanding of that thing which they don't know. The other type of ignorance or jahl is called jahl murakkab. Jahl murakkab, which you could say compound or complex ignorance, is when someone doesn't know something, but he or she doesn't know that they don't know. Whether they make a claim that, no, I know this. I know what the meaning of this verse of Quran is. I know what this hadith means, but in reality, they don't know. So they are assuming that they understand and comprehend and they know, and they are presenting themselves as if they do, but in reality, they have no knowledge with regards to those matters. So this is ignorance with regards, or according to some of the sciences, Islamic sciences. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also presents an idea about this idea about ignorance. That what is it? And how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He defines it in the Quran. the verse that we started with, and we mentioned yesterday in Surah An-Nahl, verse 78, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states that He brings you forth from the wombs of your mother, and you have no knowledge. لا تعلمون شيئا. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He provides for you, or He creates السمع والأبصار والأفئدة. He creates for you ears, the ability to hear, the ability to see, and the ability to reflect and contemplate things. Al-af'ida, which you mentioned yesterday, means hearts, but not literally, according to many of the mufassirin, the commentators of Quran. They say that al-af'ida means the ability to contemplate, the intellect. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates these things for you so that you may gain knowledge and so that you may understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also states in Surah Al-Ahqaf, when He speaks about this idea that He has created these things, because in Surah An-Nahl He says He's created these things for you, لَعَلَّكُمْ tashkurun, that perhaps you may be grateful, you may be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has created for you the ability to hear. He has created for you the ability to see. He has created for you hearts. He has created for you, in other words, minds, the ability to contemplate, the ability to think. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, that if you're grateful for these things, then you will make use of these blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Ahqaf, chapter 46 of the Quran, verse 26, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِيمَا إِن مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِيهِ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ سَمْعًا وَأَبْصَارًا وَلَأَفْئِدَةً فَمَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُمْ سَمْعُهُمْ وَلَا أَبْصَارُهُمْ وَلَا أَفْئِدَتُهُمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ إِذْ كَانُوا يَجْحَدُونَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَحَاقَ بِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا بِهِ يَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us the example of the people of the Prophet Noah. In this particular verse, He's talking about the people of Noah, of the Prophet Hud. The Prophet Hud. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states that, and this is a warning to the people of Mecca, the Ahlul Mecca. He says that before you, this nation of the Prophet Hud, that we have given them what we have not given you. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is making a comparison between the people of that time, the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the people in the nation of the Prophet Hud. He says, we have blessed them, we have given them something, or we have given them an ability, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself, He's stating that their ability was actually greater than yours. And what was that ability that He has given them? He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have given them sam'an wa absaran wal af'idah. That we've given them the faculty of hearing, seeing. We've given them the faculty of understanding and contemplating. Given them al-af'idah. And perhaps, yes, in some aspects, that ability that they had in the time of Hud was greater than what the people in Ahlul Mecca had. Perhaps certain aspects. We can actually even say the same thing, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He gives these warnings, He does so that, again, the people of that time, they don't think that, well, we are greater than anyone else. We are greater than past nations. Even if we look today, but yes, we have our 4G phones, we have our nice computers and things like that. And we may think that, oh wow, we've advanced so much. But even with all of our advancements and our 4G and Xboxes and whatever we have, we still have not figured out how in Egypt they built the pyramids. Or even in South America. It perplexes us. They didn't have the technology that we have. But yet they were able to build structures so advanced. And in fact, if we look at these pyramids have been standing for thousands of years. Sometimes we build a house and after about 50 years, the house is falling apart. It's flooding. It has so many problems. But for thousands of years, they've built this pyramid and it's standing and it's there. Neither can we go inside or actually even navigate it. Actually, people have gone inside. They've gotten lost. Never been seen again. But yet we think we're advanced. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, if you want to see, we've given them something that we haven't given you. So don't, feel proud of yourself in your advancement or your knowledge. No, we've given other nations something that we haven't given you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's telling the same thing to the people of Mecca, according to many of the commentaries of the Quran. So Allah says, we have given them the power to see. We've given them the power to hear. We've given them the power, the ability to reflect and contemplate. He says, however, فَمَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُمْ سَمْعُهُمْ وَلَا أَبْصَارُهُمْ وَلَا أَفْئِدَتُهُم. He says, however, they didn't use this ability. They didn't hone this intellect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, this ability to learn and to understand. In other words, again, they placed themselves in a state of ignorance, of jahl. How so? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He explains, He says, إِذْ كَانُوا يَجْحَدُونَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ. Because they denied, because they rejected the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through rejecting these signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, not applying their intellect to understand these signs, but rather brushing them off that, these are old tales and wives' tales. So they brushed them off. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and because of that, what they were actually doing is taking themselves away from al-aql, removing themselves and rejecting this blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to them, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had punished them through destroying them by wind. So, in order to use our intellect, according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He's outlining in this particular verse, one of the conditions, one of the aspects of our intellect is understanding the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To contemplate the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To reflect, to think, to process. Not to reject, not to belittle those signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the things that becomes clear from these particular verses that we recited, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, for example, the ayats we used yesterday, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about giving mankind this ability to reflect, this ability of the intellect. Quite often Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He is taught. For example, عَلَّمَ الْآدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught, has given ilm, knowledge to Adam. He's given knowledge of everything. Or, for example, in Surah Al-Naml, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about that individual who has knowledge of the book, قَالَ الَّذِي عِنْدَهُ عِلْمٌ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. So that individual who has knowledge of the book, when He told Sulaiman, He says, before you even blink, I will bring the throne of Bilqis before you. So one thing we have to, or we should be asking, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these particular verses, when He talks about ilm, so what is the difference between ilm and aql? Is there a difference between ilm and aql? And what is the relationship between ilm, knowledge, and the intellect? just to be very brief, because again, all of these discussions we can go into them in more depth, but just very briefly, knowledge, ilm, is a tool of the intellect. It is a means which the intellect uses in order to hone itself, in order to improve itself. In fact, in the hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, where he speaks about the 75 jundul aql, the 75 aids to the intellect. He states that one of the aids to the intellect is ilm. And in the opposite of that, the deterrent of the intellect is al-jahl. So in other words, knowledge and going forth to seek knowledge and acquiring knowledge so that your intellect can process it, it is an aid to the intellect. But on the other hand, being delinquent, as we mentioned, that one aspect of jahl or ignorance is being delinquent, not caring to learn, not moving forth to learn. Having that delinquency with regards to learning, al-jahl, this actually deters the intellect. It dulls the intellect. So we should move forth to study and to contemplate, and not simply have knowledge. And this is an interesting aspect, because if knowledge is a tool, it is a means by which the intellect develops, it doesn't simply mean that, oh, well, I'm gathering knowledge, I just have book knowledge, but we never reflect and contemplate, how do I put this knowledge to work? How do I apply this knowledge? And this is something that is very clear in this verse of Surah Al-Nahl, or Surah Al-Naml, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Surah Al-Naml, verse 40, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about that individual who has knowledge of the book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ الَّذِي عِنْدَهُ عِلْمٌ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ, that he has knowledge of the book. But not simply knowledge of the book, he understands how to apply that knowledge of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation, how to apply that knowledge which he received through the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to bring the throne of Bilqis before Sulaiman, before he even blinked, as we said, in like 1/3 of a second. He knew how to apply that knowledge, not simply, oh, well, I have this knowledge, I read the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he understood how to apply it. And this is something that, subhanAllah, we have many riwayat with regards to, again, even the Quran. That if you have an ailment in your leg, your arm, your eye, if you have a headache, there have been certain verses of the Quran that says, recite this, and it will cure you. But there's a difference between having knowledge of that and actually understanding the application, that how do I apply this? That what are the things that I need? What is the skill that I need? Is it simply, okay, I know, oh, it's this verse, I'm going to recite it, and or does it need a certain preparation spiritually? Does it need preparation in reflecting and understanding truly the meaning of these verses, and how does this particular verse actually cure my headache if I recite it? So having that intellect, al-aql, it's not simply having that knowledge, but reflecting and contemplating and learning the application. So that helps us to understand this intellect a bit better. That is, it is the application of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with through the Quran, has blessed us with through the teachings of the Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalu salatu wasalam. And for this reason, near the end of this hadith, which we are examining from Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he states that these 75 jundul aql, these 75 aids to the intellect, which he also states that they are characteristics, because with each aid to the intellect, you develop a particular characteristics. He says, فَلَا تَجْتَمِعُ هَذِهِ الْخِصَالِ كُلَّهَا مِنْ أَجْنَادِ الْعَقْلِ إِلَّا فِي نَبِيٍّ أَوْ وَسِيِّ نَبِيٍّ أَوْ مُؤْمِنٌ قَدْ امْتَحَنَ اللَّهُ قَلْبَهُ لِلْإِيمَانِ. He says that this intellect, with all of its characteristics, 75 characteristics, 75 traits that it acquires from the aids of the intellect, it is only complete in a prophet and the wasi of a prophet, meaning the imam, the vicegerent of a prophet. And that believer, mu'min, again, who's not a prophet, who's not a wasi, someone like you and I who are striving to be true believers, to be true individuals who are devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is complete in that believer who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested his or her heart with iman. And so anyone who falls short of that, he says, وَأَمَّا سَائِرُ ذَلِكَ مِنْ مَوَالِينَا. He says, and the rest of the individuals who may be from among our patrons, and yesterday we explained the meaning of the muhib, the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, the muwali of the Ahlul Bayt, the patrons of Ahlul Bayt, and the Shi'ata Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And the Shia, again, are those believers who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested their heart with iman, who have acquired all 75 traits and characteristics of the intellect. He says, but others who have fallen short of this, he says, they will continue لا يخلو من أن يكون فيه بعض هذه الجنود حتى يستكمل. He says, and others, they will have some of these traits and characteristics, and they will continue to strive until each of these 75 traits are complete in them. And listen very carefully. This is a very interesting point. Imam, he says, and we're talking about the aql. The aql says that those who have not completed these 75 things, says they will strive. It's not complete in them. And if it's not complete in them, male or female, then their intellect is not complete. And the reason why I want to emphasize this is because there is one of the traditions that we have within, which is in Nahj al-Balagha, it's also at other places, and at times it's been kind of a slippery slope, or a very, people have cakewalked around this particular statement by Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, and quite often they have done so because of not understanding what Imam Ali is talking about, not understanding and contemplating the entire corpus of the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. And so they question, they say, well, this part cannot be from the traditions of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He couldn't have said this. It sounds misogynist. He says that what? And this is after the battle of the camel. He says that, Ya ma'ashir al-nas, O people, an-nisa nawaqisul iman wa nawaqisul uqul wa nawaqisul hudud. That women are deficient in iman, their faith, in their intellect, and in their proportion. So some say, wow, how is this? And I mentioned before, this years ago, I said, look, it's not simply for women. That here the Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, anyone who has not completed these 75 then their intellect is not complete. Why are we excluding this particular hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen? It is explaining a particular context at what is going on. Because if one is not contemplating, again, their situation, their choices, that are they within the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or outside the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they choose that which is outside of the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then yes, they haven't sufficiently applied their intellect. They haven't honed these 75 qualities of the intellect. Have you not seen that those who have been slain in the way of Allah, that they are not dead, but rather they are with Allah and they are being taken care of, they are sustained. She's talking about her brother Hussein. She's talking about those who have died upon the plains of Karbala, remembering them in this majlis. Allah la'natullahi ala qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم بحق هذه المجلس الحسينية اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان وجعلنا من أعوانه وانصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. 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 The arms of the Rasul were the cradle of Hussein. Whenever Hussein cried, Rasulullah felt pain. The arms of the Rasul were the cradle of Hussein. Whenever Hussein cried, Rasulullah felt pain. Wherever Rasul went, on his shoulders were Hussein. Shafiya ummati, ya waladi ya Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni. Hussein, the love that Rasul had, unbounded for Hussein. The light of Rasul's eyes, the light of Hashimain. The love that Rasul had, unbounded for Hussein. The light of Rasul's eyes, the light of Hashimain. He always used to weep and kiss his young Hussein, as though he saw Bala come on his Nurul Ain. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni. He'd sit him in his lap and stroke his holy head. Weeping, he'd always kiss the neck of his Hussein. He'd sit him in his lap and stroke his holy head. Weeping, he'd always kiss the neck of his Hussein. Imagine the Rasul when on the burning plains the dagger kissed the neck of his dear Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Husseino minni wa ana min al-Hussein. Hussein, the Rasul took a newly born baby Hussein, clothed him in a cloth, and said Shahadatain. The Rasul took a newly born baby Hussein, clothed him in a cloth, and said Shahadatain. The weeping of Rasul on Sham Gharibain, on the desert dunes lay unclothed as Nur Alain. Hussein, no. أنا من الحسين حسين مني وأنا من الحسين حسين مني وأنا من الحسين حسين مني وأنا من الحسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا
السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا صاحب السفينة، السلام عليك أيها المدفون في المدينة ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا بضعة رسول الله، السلام عليك يا فاطمة زهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وقرة عين الرسول ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين ويعصوب الدين علي بن أبي طالب وصي رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا إمام المتقين يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميع شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم أئمة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليكم أهل بيت النبوة لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجن. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك، وجعل الله من أعوانك وأنصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك وتحت لوائك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.